still feel connected in this time of distancing, and that we would feel it even more strongly now than maybe we felt before, that this is a wonderful, wonderful time to intentionally connect, and that your presence would be on that. So thank you, Father, for this time. Thank you for every single person who's watching. And I just ask all this in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Well, thank you. Good evening, New Life. Wherever you are watching from, we are so glad that you are here. Like I said earlier, if you just joined us, we were intentional with this setup that we wanted to have because we wanted to feel like we are there with you. Right now, we are separated. We are kind of each quarantined in our own place. But for this next hour, we truly want to be together. If this is your first time ever seeing a New Life service, my name is Matt, and I am the pastor here at New Life. We are committed to being a family. We are committed to serving the city of Tustin, and we are committed to making disciples. And so this is your first time tuning in. We're so glad that you are here. This whole live thing is new for us. I've never done a service like this, so please give us grace. But like I said, we're going to try to tweak things up a little bit. We're going to try to make this a little engaging at times. There's going to be a couple times throughout my message where I might throw out a question, and I might ask you guys to comment. So don't leave me hanging. I'd love for you guys to comment and engage with one another. Write out your prayer requests. If you just logged on, go ahead and comment a prayer request. If you missed it earlier, Anna said we have digital prayer counselors available in Brittany and John. They posted their email somewhere in the thread. So go ahead and reach out to them if you want some personal prayer. Like I said, this is different, but at the same time, it's similar in the sense that we're together and we're a family. So we're going to take a break from our Apostles' Creed series. We've been doing that for about 7 weeks in a row. We're going to take a little break because there's a message specifically I want to share with you guys. So we'll pick that up next week. But if you want to take your Bibles, go ahead and open to 1 Samuel chapter 23 because I'm really excited to share with you this Bible story. You guys heard us say this last week. You will never hear us minimize what's happening. This virus has affected all of us in very real ways. Some different than others, but we've all been affected. Some physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. We've been affected. And so we just want to say that we're here for each other. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling burdened, if you're feeling truly the effect of this, you're not alone. We're definitely feeling some of that pressure and tension as well. And I think now more than ever, we need a message of hope. So turn your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 23. And we're going to start our story off with verse 7. Now, just to give a little background context, currently the king of Israel is Saul. David has been anointed by God to be the next king. And Saul doesn't want that to happen. So Saul is trying to kill David. He's trying to wipe him off this planet so that way his throne is secure. So this story is kind of right in the middle of this manhunt that's taking place. It's Saul and the massive army that he has behind him chasing after David and the few kind of band of misfits that are with him. So let's go ahead and read verse 7 and 8, and then I'll kind of want to pause and chat about what we read. So it says, Saul, he soon learned that David was at Keilah. Good, he exclaimed. We've got him now. God has handed him over to me, for he has trapped himself in a walled town. So Saul mobilized his entire army to march to Keilah and besiege David and his men. So stop right there. Saul, in his attempt to grab David and get David, he employs a common military strategy of the day, which was to besiege your enemy. Now again, our wars are so much different than they were thousands of years ago. So a lot of us, when we hear that term, we don't really get it. So I'll kind of give a little background to what it means to besiege your enemy. And what it essentially is instead of engaging in hand-to-hand combat, instead of raiding the villages or raiding the town, you essentially create a circle around the town. And by doing so, you basically cut off all access that this nation has maybe with their allies. You cut them off from the supplies, the food that they maybe get from neighboring towns or other nations. You cut off all travel. You even cut off all communication. And so what you would do, these enemies, they would besiege other countries. And it was basically like the ultimate form of isolation. A city or a town or a nation that gets besieged, it slowly starts to wither as supplies are decreased, as communication is cut down. And it's a very effective strategy. It's kind of like a water that's slowly being boiled. You know, at first the enemy camps around you and you think, well, it's not that bad. But slowly as days and weeks and months and even years go by, you are fully feeling the effect of being besieged. It's quite effective, and the truth is it's a devastating military strategy. And we see that Saul is besieging David and his men. And I couldn't help when I read this story to see the parallel where, does it feel like to anyone else that we are being besieged right now? That we are being kind of encircled by this virus, and it's kind of cutting off our supplies. It's making contact with one another more difficult. It's making travel, obviously, more difficult. I mean, we're doing church online, for goodness sakes. I don't think it would be an over-exaggeration to say this virus, COVID-19, has besieged us. I want to hear from you guys. This is the first chance of participation. Which supply or which item, whether it be food or a paper good, which has been the hardest for you to get in this season? As some of the comments come in, I don't know if you guys have seen, New Life has been doing a toilet paper ministry. We've literally been giving out free toilet paper because that's how hard it has been to come by. I mean, supplies are really scarce right now as an effect of being kind of slowly besieged. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What are some of the things that you kind of took for granted that now in today's climate have been hard to come by? I'll give you guys a second to think about it. If you guys, maybe things jump out to you. I know eggs have been hard for me and my family to find. Chicken has been hard for some people to find, right? It's crazy. Our supplies, things that we never thought we would struggle with in Orange County, California, has been lost. I talked about travel too. I don't know if you guys know, I was supposed to be in Montana right now for my 30th birthday. I had a trip planned with some of my friends, and I had a trip planned with my family to be snowboarding as I turned 30, and that trip was canceled due to this virus. And so I know there's some of you guys as well who had trips that were canceled. You had plans and no longer kind of are those in effect. I read this story and immediately went, wow, we're being besieged. We're being encircled, and slowly kind of our supplies, our communication, our travel, our sanity is slowly being sucked away. I want to keep reading because I think it's interesting to happen what's next, right? David is obviously feeling the effects of it just like we are. And look what happens next. Go to verse 13. And it says, so David, right, and his men, about 600 of them, they left Keilah, and they began roaming the countryside. Word soon reached Saul that David had escaped, so he didn't go to Keilah after all. David now stayed in the strongholds of the wilderness. Pay attention to that phrase. I'll say it again. David now stayed in the strongholds of the wilderness and in the hill country of Ziph. Saul hunted him day after day, but couldn't let Saul find him. So again, right, David is besieged. He's slowly having his supplies, his communication, his travel cut down and dwindle. And so what happens as a result? Well, David is forced into the wilderness. Now, the wilderness, as you guys know, is the epitome of the unknown. Right, when you go deep into the wilderness, and I'm not talking like Peter's Canyon, I'm talking deep, real wilderness, you know that there's a high level of unpredictability. Meaning at any moment, an animal could come across your way. At any moment, the weather can drastically change. You know that maybe a path that you've taken 100 times before, a tree might fall and completely block that path. When you are in the wilderness, you are essentially living in a chaotic, unpredictable, unknown environment. And throughout the Bible, from almost beginning to end, the wilderness is even used as a theme. It's used as a theme of chaos and unknown and unpredictability. And you see the theme of the wilderness kind of keep popping up throughout the biblical story. Again, are you guys seeing the parallels? David is besieged. He is slowly trapped, suffocated, and it forces him into the wilderness, the place of the unknown. I think that's how many of us would feel right now. Okay, so we're quarantined. Okay, my job has sent me home. But what's next? Like, where do we go from here? It seems like our own government doesn't really know what's happening and long-term plans. It seems like every 24 hours, news are changing. It just shows us that we're living in an unpredictable time. I know many of you guys are wrestling with questions like, when is my work going to resume? I'd love for you guys to be bold, even right now, and maybe share some of the fears and some of the questions that you have. Maybe the questions that you are swirling around your head as you're in this wilderness time is, will I be able to make my mortgage payment? Will all my bills be taken care of? Will I get laid off? Do I have the virus? Will I share the virus? We are living in unpredictable times right now. We are living in the epitome of chaos. We have been besieged, and it has sent us into the wilderness, into a place of unknown, confusion, and chaos. And I think if we were real with each other, we don't know when it's going to end. We don't really know how it's going to turn out. We are living in wilderness times. I know it's weird to think of us in the wilderness. We're in Orange County, Matt. What can you mean? But yes, but in the same way, it's unpredictable, and it's chaotic, and it's dark, and we don't have a lot of clarity. And I know that's what a lot of you guys are feeling right now. You're feeling the weight of this wilderness. When will life resume? When will my kids go back to school? When will I be able to just go out and do life like I've always done it? When will I be able to start seeing my friends? All of these questions of unknown are circling in our heads, and they're starting to weigh us down a bit. Saul besieges David and forces him deep into the wilderness. This virus has besieged us, you could say, and it sent us into a place of the unknown. And we are feeling the effects of it.
One of the people writing in says they're concerns of the way that they may be perceived to others because of their ethnicity.
Wow. That's so honest. I appreciate you sharing that. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Now, what I do know, and I know this might surprise you, Matt Hemphill, Orange County kid. I'm not the biggest wilderness guy, but I do watch a lot of Bear Grylls, and so there's a few things that I can tell you. And that when you're in the wilderness, it's really, really, really important that you get some shelter, right? You watch any show, they drop you off, and the first thing you got to do is you got to get some shelter. Now, there's two ways to do that. The first way is to build it yourself. Right? You take some palm branches, you take some sticks, somehow you fashion them together in a way that you create shelter for yourself. It's not bad. And option two is rather than create shelter, you go try to find existing shelter. Right? This could be a cave, all right? Or this could be, an embankment that you kind of can slip under. There's maybe a tree branch that's kind of fallen. It's created its own shelter. Right? You can create your own, or you can go find already existing shelter. And what the experts will tell you is that the second option is always better. That you'd rather find yourself a cave. You'd rather find yourself some shelter that's already in place, that's outside of the making of your hands. And why I find that fascinating is that I feel like the same thing applies for us. right? In the sense that we're in an emotional wilderness, we're in a spiritual wilderness. There's really two options that you and I have. And that is, one, we can try to create shelter for ourselves. We can try to make security. We can try to manufacture something that protects us. Or we can take option two, and that's we can look for safety and refuge and shelter outside of us. I want to show you guys kind of some different examples of this from the Bible. So go ahead and turn with me to Exodus chapter 32, because we get a really good picture of kind of what this looks like. Go to Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, again, just to kind of set the scene here. The Israelites have been wandering, guess where? The wilderness, for quite a while now. And they're actually not only in a physical wilderness, but they, like us, are in an emotional wilderness because their leader, Moses, is presently gone. So they're in a physical wilderness, which brings about all the unpredictability, all the chaos that we talked about. But they're in an emotional wilderness like us. Their leader is gone. And he's been gone for a while. And so they, like us, they're starting to hear some questions swirl around in their heads. Is he ever coming back? Are we ever going to get out of here? What if enemies come upon us and we're stuck here in the wilderness and no one's here to defend us? They, like us, are starting to hear some of those confusing thoughts and doubt and some of those questions that really can weigh you down. And so look what the Israelites do in this place of physical and emotional wilderness. Look what option they choose to do. Let's read in verse 1. It says, when the people saw how long it was taking Moses to come back down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron. Come on, they said, make us some gods who can lead us. We don't know what happened to this fellow Moses who brought us here from the land of Egypt. So Aaron said, take the gold rings from the ears of your wives and sons and daughters and bring them to me. And so all the people took the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then Aaron took the gold, melted it down, and modeled it into the shape of a calf. When the people saw it, they exclaimed, "O Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Verse 5, Aaron saw how excited the people were, so he built an altar in front of the calf. And then he announced, tomorrow will be a festival to the Lord. I want you to pause right there. We see the nation of Israel in a physical, but also emotional wilderness. They're swirling with questions and doubts about the future and about their well-being and what's going to happen. You can tell they're really feeling the effects of it. But what they choose to do is they choose to do option one. Hey, let's create some security. Hey, we're feeling this anxiety. We're feeling these feelings of uncomfortability. So let's kind of get away from that. Let's build an altar. Or let's build a God that we can worship. And let's build this and it'll make us feel more comfortable. It'll decrease some of our worry. It'll decrease some of our anxiety. This is the Israelites choosing option one in the wilderness to create security, create shelter for themselves. And we know from the rest of this story, this goes terribly, terribly wrong. Instead of trusting in the God, instead of trusting in Moses, they chose to take matters into their own hands. Hey, let's fix this. I don't know where Moses is, I don't know where God is, but I got this. Let's build a God, let's take the earrings, let's create security for ourselves. And it goes miserable. I can't help but think and see some people doing that today. Faced with the uncertainty, faced with the anxiety and the pressures that we are feeling, we're seeing people take matters into their own hands. They're uncomfortable with these doubts that are swirling. They're uncomfortable with these feelings. And so they're taking matters into their own hands and say, well, I'm going to do something about it. And I'm going to fix it. And I'm going to make sure that I'm taken care of. And we see this, right? We see people hoarding supplies. Like buying way more than they need. Right? Regardless of the fact that there's people who actually need them, we're seeing people really just build up an inventory for themselves. And it's gone to a very unhealthy extent. All right, we're seeing people who are wearing masks inside their own homes. They're not even stepping outside because they don't want a single breath of fresh air. What we're seeing is people across the country who are uncomfortable in this emotional wilderness say, hey, I'm going to create shelter for myself. I don't know about the rest of you, but I know that I'm going to be taken care of, and I know that I'm going to put the measures in place so that I'm okay. And I don't think this is the solution that we should run to. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't use wisdom. I'm not saying we shouldn't be wise. There's a difference between manufacturing security, trying to microwave safety, and being wise. See, wisdom is taking the proper precautions to minimize your risk. Right? That's absolutely what all of us should be doing. But the difference between the two is the wise person knows that even with their best efforts, they cannot eliminate the risk. That even under the wisest conditions and the best precautions, there's always a level of unpredictability. They even know there's never a chance that they can get themselves out of this wilderness. There's always a level of risk. Where the other people really believe that if I just do enough, those who want to create shelter, create security, if I can just do enough, if I can just take enough precautions, if I can go one more trip to the store, if I can buy one more pair of gloves, then I will be safe. The difference between a wise person and a person who creates security is control and absolutes. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be wise, but I am saying that we shouldn't take it to the extreme and think that somehow by the work of our own hands, we can completely avoid the risk, the wilderness that we are feeling. The nation of Israel were uncomfortable with these feelings of anxiety, and so they microwaved security and went terribly bad. Many of us, maybe many of you are, and like myself, we're feeling uncomfortable. We're feeling anxiety rise. But I want to urge you and encourage you to consider the second option. Let's go back to our story where Samuel and David. I want to wrap this up for you guys. Go back to, what was it? It was 1 Samuel 23. And now we're going to be in verse 24. Look what David does, right? So he's forced in the wilderness. He's been besieged by Saul. Right? They enclosed him. His supplies, his communication, his travel, all gets cut down. Forces him deep into the wilderness, the literal epitome of the unknown, unpredictable, chaotic world. And look what David chooses to do. Go look at verse 24b. It says, meanwhile, David and his men had moved into the wilderness of Maon in the Araba Valley south of Jeshimon. And watch this. When David heard that Saul and his men were searching for him, he went even further into the wilderness to the great rock. And he remained there in the wilderness of Maon. But Saul kept after him in the wilderness. Do you guys notice how many times wilderness is repeated just in those few verses? The writer's trying to show there's a theme here. And we need to pay attention to the unpredictability, chaos that David is facing. But what he does is he doesn't try to escape the wilderness. Do you see what he did? It said he pressed even further into the wilderness. He stared chaos and unpredictability in the face and moved towards it, not away. And you might be wondering, why on earth would he do that? Why would he go further into the unknown? Don't we all want to move towards a place of known and security? But look what it says. Why did David do that? He moved deeper into the wilderness because there was a great rock there. So David risks more unknown, risks more chaos. Why? Because there's a great rock there. And look what this rock does. In verse 26, it says, Saul and David were now on opposite sides of mountains. I'm no geologist. I don't know when a rock becomes a mountain, but we know this rock was big enough to be a mountain. And this rock, this mountain, is actually standing in between David and Saul. I like to imagine it's like they're playing a game of like Tom and Jerry, where every time Saul goes one way, David goes the other. And every time Saul goes the other, David goes. And for whatever reason, this rock, this mountain, is keeping the two separated. It stands between David and danger. And I think it's fascinating as we kind of finish this story. Look at verse 26. It says, so Saul and David were now on opposite sides of a mountain, this great rock that David wanted to seek out. Saul and David are on opposite sides. And look how it goes. Just as Saul and his men began to close in on David and his men, an urgent message reached Saul that the Philistines were raiding Israel again. Well, look at verse 28. So Saul quit chasing David and returned to fight the Philistines. And ever since that time, the place where David was camped has been called the Rock of Escape. So we see David presses further into the wilderness. He does the exact opposite of what we would think you would do at a time of chaos. But he does it because he knows there's shelter there. He knows there's security and refuge that is outside of his own hands. And we see it's this rock, this mountain, is essentially what saves David's life. Like Saul is there. There's only one rock in between David and his enemy, and yet for whatever reason, Saul could not get past this rock. The rock saves David's life. My favorite part about this whole story is how David ties it together at the very end of his life. So as he's on his deathbed and as he's kind of reflecting back on his life, look what he says. Look at the insight he gives us about this rock that I think is especially important for you and I. Go to 2 Samuel 22 and let's see how this gets resolved. 2 Samuel 22, verse 31. Look at the language and the wording that David gives us to this rock. 2 Samuel 22, verse 31. He says literally him at his end of his life, as he's passing away, he says, you want to know about the wilderness? He says, verse 31, God's way is perfect, and all the Lord's promises prove true. He is a shield for all who look to him for protection. Watch this. For who is God except the Lord? Who but our God is a solid rock? God is my strong fortress, and he makes my way perfect. So David, at the end of his life, he says, you want to know the real rock? It's been God. God has always been the rock to me in my wilderness. Here's David, a man after God's own heart, who's faced trial and tribulation for many years of his life. And as he looks back at his wilderness, at his chaos, at the moments of the most danger, he says, I always had a rock. I always had shelter. I always had a place of refuge. And it was always God. It was never just a physical rock. There was always something more to it. He says, the Lord is my rock. The Lord is my fortress. The Lord is my place of refuge. And I love how David ties it together. See, because like David, we've already assessed, we've been besieged, we've been quarantined, we've been cut off. It's forced us deep into the wilderness of the unknown. We're faced with mass chaos, unpredictability. None of us know what's going to happen. And yet I believe we still have those two options that I mentioned earlier. And here's the two choices that you and I have to make. Option one is, faced with this uncertainty, are we going to take matters into our own hands and try to create some shelter? Are we going to try to microwave some security that'll be a quick fix and maybe decrease some of these uncomfortable feelings? Or will we, like David, choose to find safety outside of ourselves? Will you and I, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of Yahweh, decide to run to him? to really look at this chaos and say, yeah, I could maybe try to take some attempts and I can try to build stuff, but none of that is as effective as running to the rock, the capital R rock of Jesus Christ. I really believe that so many of us who really believe that, oh, I can fix this, and I can defeat this, and I can prevent this, I can by the work of my hands, I truly believe that does not lead to life. Jesus, when he meets the Pharisees, he gives them an interesting phrase. He says, you guys are like whitewashed tombs. Essentially, you're maybe healthy on the outside, but you're dead on the inside. My fear is that some of us, by taking such great precautions not to get sick, we're taking such great precautions to protect our physical body, that we're neglecting our souls and we're actually withering inside. I don't want any of us in this season to be whitewashed tombs. I don't want any of us to put our physical external above our internal, eternal soul. And see, as I share this message, I'm aware that most of us are believers. Most of us would say, yeah, man, I know I have a rock. I know I have God in my life. I know he can be my shelter. But here's the thing. We don't run to him in these times. I don't know what's more crazy, right? It's like the rain is coming down on us. We know we have a rock in our life. We have a cave. We have a place to shelter. And yet we instead just choose to be rained on. We instead just choose to fill ourselves with news. And we instead just choose to fill ourselves with social media, other things to occupy our time, rather than actually running to the rock. So I'm calling to my brothers and sisters and say, yes, I know you know the rock, but have you ran to him in this season? Have you chosen to truly make him your place of refuge? I don't know, this looks like maybe before you turn on the news, you read your Bible. Before planning the next week or 2 weeks, you pray. Before freaking out, you text a Christian. When your brothers and sisters say, hey, can we be together? I need some help. I don't know what it looks like exactly for you, but I know that God, the rock, our fortress, wants us to run to him. Now, I wish I could say that none of us would get sick. And I wish I could say that every Christian who makes God their rock, none of us get physically sick, and I can't do that. I know wisdom says not even the best precautions sometimes fall short. But what I can tell you is that physically sick or not sick, you want to be in the presence of God. Physically sick or not sick, you want to be under the wings of Yahweh. You want to be up against the rock of Jesus Christ. And so this is not a sermon on how to avoid getting sick. No, this is a sermon on how to remain alive in the midst of chaos. This is not a sermon on how to get out of this without any scars. This is a sermon on how to continue to live a life of abundance and peace regardless of the chaos. And that is found only in the rock of Jesus Christ. It is found only when we choose to leave the rain and go sit under the arms of our Father. David looks back on his life, and he's almost talking to New Life. He's saying, New Life, can I give you a secret? Can I give you some words of wisdom? God's been my rock from day one. He's been my fortress, and he's been my shelter. And he's done a better job at it than I ever could. And so New Life right now, as we're scrambling to protect ourselves, as we're scrambling to try to make sure that we don't get harmed, and we have to build our own shelter, build our own security, what if we stopped and said, the Lord is my shelter. The Lord is my rock. And I will choose him daily. And I will run to him daily. And sick or not sick, I will allow him to be my hope and allow him to be my comfort. New Life, we're in the wilderness. I wish it wasn't so. My heart hurts for some of you who are feeling it more than others. But hear me when I say, we have a rock that rock will stand between us and danger. And that rock will provide the hope that we need. And that rock is not hard to find. That rock tells us that those who seek find every time. I'll close with a simple story that hope lands it. My daughter, she loves playing hide and go seek. I'm usually the one that counts, and she's usually the one that hides. And my favorite part is I'll count to 10, and I'll say, ready or not, here I come. And I open my eyes and I take one step, and she pops out and says, here I am. And I go, Jameson, that's not how it works. You're supposed to let me come find you. And she goes, okay. And I go, okay, you go hide. And I go count, and I go, 8, 9, 10, ready or not, here I come. And I take one step, and she pops out. And she says, here I am. I say, baby girl, you got to let me come find you. And I honestly see the same thing when it comes to God. Yes, we are told to seek Him, but don't get it twisted like He's hard to find. Don't get it twisted for 1 second that the goal of Him is actually to hide Himself from us. It's more for that engaging moment. For as soon as we take one step towards God, He says, here I am. As soon as we, lost in the wilderness, take one step towards the real rock of Jesus, He says, here I am. Come to me. He is not hard to find. We knock, we seek, and we will find. We have two options, New Life. Take matters into our own hands, or seek shelter that's beyond ourselves. A shelter that's proven His love for us. It's proven His faithfulness. A shelter that I'll bet on 10 times out of 10. And in this season, I urge you and encourage you as a brother, as a friend. Let's make the rock our shelter for this season. God, we thank you